They told her she was worthless. They told her she was too old, too plain, and used up. After 10 years of marriage, Alice didn't just lose her husband. She lost her home, her dignity, and her will to fight. She signed the divorce papers with a shaking hand and walked out into the cold rain with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. She thought her life was over. She had no idea that the moment she walked away from the man who broke her, she was walking straight toward the man who would save her. She knocked on the wrong door. Or was it the right one? What happens when a discarded wife meets a ruthless billionaire? You won't believe who opens the door. The pen felt like lead in Alice's hand. The scratching sound it made against the paper echoed in the silent, sterile conference room of Sterling and Vance, the law firm her husband Silvana had built with her help, though no one remembered that part anymore. "Just sign it, Elle," Silvana said, checking his Rolex. It was a Submariner, a gift she had saved for 3 years to buy him for his 40th birthday. Now, it just looked like a shackle on the wrist of a stranger. "I have a flight to catch in 2 hours. Tiffany is waiting in the car." Tiffany, the 24-year-old intern. The cliché that had destroyed Alice's life. Alice looked up, her eyes dry. She had cried all her tears 3 months ago when she found the second phone in Silvana's gym bag. "Is that all I am to you, Silvana? A signature? 10 years. I worked 2 jobs so you could finish law school. I paid the rent on that shoebox apartment in Queens while you studied for the bar. And now, Tiffany is waiting." Silvana sighed, the sound of a man inconvenienced by a fly. He smoothed his tie. Silk, Italian, expensive. "Don't make this dramatic, Alice. We've grown apart. It happens. You're simple. You like staying home, knitting, whatever it is you do. I need someone who fits my world now. Someone who looks good on a yacht in Saint-Tropez. Look, I'm being generous. You get the Honda and $20,000. That's more than enough to start over in wherever you came from." The lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, who refused to make eye contact with Alice, slid the check across the mahogany table. $20,000. That was the price of a decade of devotion. It wouldn't even cover a year's rent in New York City these days. "I don't want your money," Alice whispered, though her hand trembled. "Take the money, Alice," Silvana snapped, his voice losing its faux politeness. "Don't be stupid. You have no degree, no recent work experience, and let's be honest, you aren't 25 anymore. How are you going to survive? Bagging groceries?" The cruelty of it stung more than the betrayal. He wasn't just leaving her. He was mocking her inability to exist without him. He had designed her life that way. He had told her not to work, to focus on the house, to support him. He had crippled her independence, and now he was laughing at her limp. Alice grit her teeth. She picked up the pen and signed Alice Vance for the very last time. Then she slid the papers back. She left the check on the table. "I said, I don't want your pity money," she said, her voice gaining a sudden steel-like strength. She stood up, smoothing down her thrift store skirt. "And Silvana, when you're old and Tiffany realizes you're just a bitter man with a bad back, don't call me." Silvana laughed, a cold, barking sound. "Good luck, Alice. You're going to need it." She walked out of the glass-walled office, past the receptionists who whispered behind their hands, and into the elevator. She didn't look back. But as the doors closed, the facade crumbled. She leaned her forehead against the cold metal and let out a single, shuddering breath. She was homeless. She was 34. And she had exactly $40 in her pocket. As she stepped out of the building, the sky opened up. Of course. It was pouring rain. A sleek black Mercedes was parked at the curb. The window rolled down, revealing Tiffany's perfectly contoured face behind oversized Gucci sunglasses. "Bye, Alice," Tiffany chirped, blowing a bubble with her gum. "Silvana says the Honda is parked around the block. Try not to scratch it on your way out of town." Alice watched the Mercedes speed off, splashing dirty puddle water onto her shoes. She stood there, soaked to the bone, staring at the gray New York skyline. "Okay," she whispered to the rain. "Okay." She didn't go to the Honda. She left it there. She walked to the subway station, her suitcase rolling loudly on the pavement. She had nowhere to go, but she remembered a name from a lifetime ago, written on a napkin she had kept in her wallet for 6 years. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't a family member. It was a promise made by a stranger she had helped in a coffee shop once, a man who had looked as broken then as she felt now. The napkin read, "If you ever need a door to open, come to 885th Avenue. Ask for Sebastian." It was a long shot, a desperate, foolish shot. But it was all she had. The subway ride was a blur of noise and smells. Alice clutched her suitcase, trying to make herself small. She got off at 72nd Street and walked. The rain hadn't stopped. It had only gotten colder. By the time she reached 5th Avenue, she looked like a drowned rat. Her hair was plastered to her face, her cheap mascara was running, and her shoes squelched with every step. This was the Gold Coast of Manhattan. The fart. Buildings here weren't just apartments. They were fortresses of old money. Doormen in livery stood guard like sentinels. Limousines idled in driveways. Alice felt the heavy gaze of judgment from passers-by under their massive umbrellas. She found number 880. It was a limestone mansion, narrower than the modern high-rises, but radiating a terrifying amount of power. The heavy iron gates were shut. There was no doorman outside, just a camera with a red blinking light and an intercom box that looked like it cost more than her former house. Alice hesitated. This was madness. That napkin was 6 years old. The man, whoever he was, probably didn't even live here anymore. He was probably a crazy person who gave out fake addresses. "You have no degree, no experience. How will you survive?" Silvana's voice echoed in her head. She gritted her teeth and pressed the buzzer. A long silence followed. Then a crackle. "Deliveries are at the rear entrance," a clipped, British voice said. I'm not a delivery," Alice stammered, shivering violently. "I'm here to see Sebastian." Silence again, longer this time. "Mr. Sebastian does not accept unsolicited visitors. Please remove yourself from the premises or security will be called." "Wait," Alice cried out, leaning into the intercom. "Please. He gave me a napkin years ago. In a coffee shop in Brooklyn, he dropped his medication, and I helped him find the pills. He told me if I ever needed a door to open, please. I have nowhere else to go." The line went dead. Alice slumped against the cold stone pillar. "Stupid," she muttered to herself, tears finally mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "So stupid." She turned to grab the handle of her suitcase, ready to drag herself to a shelter, when a loud click echoed through the street. The massive iron gate began to swing open. Alice froze. The heavy oak front door of the mansion opened. A man stepped out. He wasn't the man from the coffee shop. This man was elderly, with posture so straight he looked like he had a steel rod for a spine, wearing a tuxedo. He held a massive black umbrella. He walked down the short path to the gate holding the umbrella over Alice's head, shielding her instantly from the downpour. "Ms. Vance?" the butler asked. Alice blinked, stunned. How do you know my name?" "Mr. Sebastian has a very good memory," the butler said, his face unreadable. "He has been expecting you." "Expecting me?" Alice asked, her voice trembling. "For 6 years?" "Some debts take time to collect, madam. Come inside. You are turning blue." He ushered her into the foyer, and the warmth hit her like a physical blow. The entry hall was bigger than her entire house with Silvana. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting prisms of light onto marble floors that were polished to a mirror shine. A grand double staircase swept upwards, framing a massive portrait of a man with piercing blue eyes. "Wait here," the butler said. "I will inform the master that you have arrived." Alice stood there, dripping water onto the priceless marble, clutching her battered suitcase. She felt like an intruder, a stain on this perfection. She looked at the portrait. The man in the painting looked fierce, almost predatory. "You're dripping on my Persian rug." The voice was deep, resonant, and came from the top of the stairs. Alice looked up. Standing on the landing wasn't the frail old man she remembered helping in the coffee shop. It was a man in his mid-30s, tall, with broad shoulders that strained against a charcoal gray sweater. He had dark hair, slightly messy, and the same piercing blue eyes as the portrait. He held a glass of amber liquid in one hand and looked down at her with an expression that hovered between amusement and irritation. I'm so sorry," Alice stammered, trying to wipe the floor with her foot, which only made a squeaking noise. "I asked for Sebastian, the older gentleman? I think I have the wrong house." The man walked down the stairs, his movements fluid and predatory, like a jungle cat. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom, towering over her. "Sebastian was my father," the man said. His voice was smooth, like velvet wrapped around a dagger. "He passed away 4 years ago." Alice's heart sank. "Oh, I'm so sorry." "I didn't know. I'll leave." She grabbed her suitcase handle, turning to flee. "Stop!" the man commanded. It wasn't a shout, but the authority in his voice froze her feet to the floor. He descended the final steps and walked around her, inspecting her like one might inspect a car they were considering buying. "My father left me a lot of things," he said quietly. "Assets, companies, headaches, and a small black book of debts of honor. Your name was in it. Alice Vance, the woman who found his heart medication when he was having an episode in a Brooklyn cafe." He stopped in front of her. "My name is Julian Thorne," Alice gasped. Julian Thorne. Even living under Sylvana's shadow, she knew that name. Thorne Enterprises owned half the city. Tech, real estate, shipping. He was the billionaire wolf of Wall Street. Ruthless. Cold. A recluse who never gave interviews. "Mr. Thorne," Alice breathed. "I didn't want to bother you. He said if I needed help." "And you need help," Julian stated, looking at her wet clothes, the cheap suitcase, the ringless finger where a tan line still showed. "Divorce?" Alice looked down. "Today. And he took everything?" "Pretty much." Julian swirled the drink in his glass. He took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. Suddenly, the corner of his mouth twitched upwards. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a dangerous smile. A smile that promised chaos. "Good," Julian said. Alice blinked. "Good. If you had everything, you wouldn't be desperate," Julian said, stepping closer. "And I need someone desperate. I have a problem, Alice. A very expensive, very public problem that requires a wife. Specifically, a wife who is unassuming, patient, and has absolutely nothing to lose." He extended a hand. "My father owed you a favor. I pay my debts. I offer you a deal. You need a home, money, and perhaps a little revenge on the man who threw you away." Alice looked at his hand. It was large, strong, and manicured. "What do I have to do?" she whispered. Julian's smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth. "Simple. You have to marry me. For 1 year. And in exchange, I'll give you the world. And we will make your ex-husband regret the day he was born." Alice stared at Julian Thorne. The rain was still drumming against the massive windows, but inside, the air was thick, with the scent of expensive scotch and danger. "Marry you?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Thorne, you could have any woman in New York. Models, actresses, heiresses. Why would you want a 34-year-old divorcee who just got dumped for an intern?" Julian walked over to the fireplace, placing his glass on the mantel. "Precisely because you are none of those things, Alice. Models talk to the press. Actresses act for the highest bidder. Heiresses have fathers who think they can tell me how to run my company." He turned to face her, his eyes cold and calculating. "I am in the middle of a hostile takeover of Vanguard Tech. The board of directors is old-fashioned. They think I'm volatile. A lone wolf. They are threatening to block my acquisition unless I show some stability. A wife signals stability. A quiet, grateful wife who stays out of the way signals control. Alice felt a flash of irritation cut through her despair. So I'm to be a prop, like a potted plant or a nice lamp. For 1 year, Julian countered. In exchange, you get access to my accounts, a penthouse in Manhattan, and a $5 million severance package when we annul the marriage. And he paused, stepping closer, his voice dropping an octave. I will give you the resources to crush Sylvana Sterling. He pulled a tablet from a side table and tapped the screen. Sylvana Sterling. Senior partner at Sterling & Vance. Currently over-leveraged on a bad real estate deal in Miami. Desperate for a big client to cover his losses. That's why he pushed you out so cheaply. He needed the liquid cash. Alice looked at the screen. It was a dossier on her husband. Julian knew more about Sylvana's finances than she did. He told me I was worthless, Alice said, the memory stinging like a fresh cut. And under my wing, you will be the most powerful woman in the room, Julian promised. So, do we have a deal? Or do you want to go back out into the rain? Alice looked at the fireplace, then at her soaked suitcase. She thought of Tiffany's smirk. She thought of the 10 years she had wasted being good. I have conditions, Alice said, surprised by her own boldness. Julian raised an eyebrow. Oh, I don't want to just be a prop. If we do this, we do it right. I don't want to hide in your house. I want to learn. I want to know how you do it, how you control people. I don't just want Sylvana to regret leaving me. I want him to fear me. Julian stared at her for a long moment. Then, a genuine laugh escaped his lips. It transformed his face, making him look less like a statue and more like a man. Perhaps my father was right about you, Julian said. He wrote in his book that you had quiet steel. Very well. I accept your terms. He snapped his fingers. The butler, Alfred, appeared seemingly out of thin air. Alfred, show the future Mrs. Thorne to the blue suite. Burn her clothes. Get the stylist team here by 6 a.m. We have a lot of work to do. Blank. The next 2 weeks were a blur of torture and luxury. Alice didn't just get a makeover, she was reconstructed. A team of stylists, dermatologists, and etiquette coaches descended on the mansion. Her mousy brown hair was dyed a rich, glossy chestnut and cut into a sharp, sophisticated bob that framed her jawline. Her skin was scrubbed, peeled, and polished until it glowed. But the hardest part wasn't the physical change. It was the mental conditioning. Every night at dinner, Julian would drill her. You walk into a room. The CEO of J.P. Morgan is there. He ignores you. What do you do? Julian asked, cutting into his steak. I wait for him to acknowledge me? Alice ventured. Wrong! Julian snapped. You speak to the person next to him. You laugh. You become the center of gravity. You make him realize that he is the one missing out. Never wait for permission to exist, Alice. Take up space. It was exhausting. There were tears. There were moments she wanted to pack her bag and leave. But every time she faltered, she remembered Sylvana's voice. How are you going to survive? Bagging groceries? And she would straighten her spine and try again. By the end of the second week, Alice didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. She wore a tailored cream pantsuit that cost more than her Honda. Her eyes were sharp, accented by winged liner. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a weapon. Julian walked into the room, dressed in a tuxedo. He paused when he saw her. For the first time since she arrived, he didn't have a criticism. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second too long. Tonight is the test, he said, his voice gruff. The Starlight Gala. Everyone will be there. The press, the board, and... Sylvana, Alice finished. Are you ready? Julian offered her his arm. Alice took a deep breath. She slipped her arm through his. The fabric of his suit was cool, but his arm underneath was warm and hard as iron. "I'm ready," she said, and for the first time she meant it. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was bathed in floodlights. A red carpet stretched up the iconic steps, flanked by a wall of screaming paparazzi. Inside the limousine, Alice's hands were shaking. "Breathe," Julian commanded. He reached over and took her hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "You are Mrs. Julian Thorne. You own the sidewalk. You own the museum. You own the night. Do you understand?" "I'm not Mrs. Thorne yet," she whispered. "We haven't signed the papers." In their eyes, "You are. We announced the engagement this morning." The stock price of Thorne Enterprises went up 4% just on the rumor. "Don't disappoint the shareholders, Alice." The door opened. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning. "Mr. Thorne! Mr. Thorne! Who is she? Is it true you're engaged? Look this way." Alice stepped out. The noise was deafening. Instinctively, she wanted to shrink, to hunch her shoulders. But Julian's hand was on the small of her back, a warm pressure pushing her forward. "Take up space." She lifted her chin. She remembered her training. She didn't smile like a pageant girl. She gave a cool, mysterious half-smile. She looked directly into the camera lenses. Julian leaned down to her ear. "Perfect. Keep moving. Don't stop for anyone unless I stop." They ascended the stairs like royalty. Inside, the great hall was transformed into a glittering ballroom. Waiters circulated with champagne. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. Alice scanned the room. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "There," Julian murmured, tilting his head slightly to the left. Alice followed his gaze. Near the Temple of Dendor, holding a glass of champagne and looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo that was slightly too tight, was Silvana. Hanging onto his arm, wearing a bright pink dress that was far too loud for the occasion, was Tiffany. Tiffany was laughing loudly, trying to get the attention of a bored-looking socialite. Silvana was scanning the room, looking for someone important to talk to. "He looks small," Alice whispered, realizing it for the first time. "He is small," Julian corrected. "Let's go say hello." "Now?" Panic flared in her chest. Attack is the best form of defense. "Come." Julian steered her through the crowd. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. People whispered as they passed. "Is that Julian Thorne? Who is the woman? She's stunning." Silvana didn't see them coming. He was too busy scolding Tiffany for laughing too loud. "Silvana?" Julian's voice boomed, cutting through the chatter. Silvana spun around. His eyes widened when he saw Julian Thorne. He immediately put on his lawyer smile, oily and eager. "Mr. Thorne, what an honor. I'm Silvana Sterling, from Sterling and Vance. We've been trying to get a meeting with your legal department regarding—" Silvana stopped. He looked at the woman on Julian's arm. He blinked. He squinted. Alice stared back at him. She didn't flinch. She stood taller in her Louboutin heels, looking down at him. "Alice?" Silvana choked out. The glass in his hand tilted, spilling champagne onto his sleeve. Tiffany whipped her head around. Her jaw dropped. "Alice? The housewife?" "Good evening, Silvana," Alice said. Her voice was smooth, unrecognizable from the pleading woman in the conference room. "Tiffany, that color is bold." I don't understand," Silvana stammered, looking from Alice's diamond earrings to Julian's possessive hand on her waist. "What are you doing here? You? I thought you went back to Ohio." "Alice is my fiancée," Julian interrupted, his voice cold enough to freeze the champagne. "And she was just telling me about her previous marriage. It seems her ex-husband had a difficult time appreciating the value of a true asset." Silvana paled. "Fiancé? But we've only been divorced for 2 weeks." "Fast work, Alice," Tiffany sneered, though her eyes were darting nervously to Julian. "Did you meet him on a sugar baby website?" The circle of people around them went silent. The insult hung in the air. Alice felt a flash of anger, but Julian's grip tightened on her waist, a signal to hold steady. Alice laughed. It was a light, airy sound. "Oh, Tiffany, always projecting. No, Julian and I have known each other for years. He was just waiting for me to be available." She turned her gaze to Silvana. "And honestly, Silvana, I should thank you. If you hadn't released me, I would never have upgraded." The crowd chuckled. Silvana turned beet red. "You can't talk to me like that," Silvana hissed, stepping forward. "I know who you are, Alice. You're nothing. You're living off his money just like you lived off mine." Julian stepped in front of Alice. He didn't touch Silvana, but his presence was a physical wall. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Sterling," Julian said, his voice dangerously low, "I would be very careful about how you speak to the future owner of your building." Silvana froze. "What?" "Sterling and Vance rents the 40th floor of the Apex Tower, do you not?" Julian swirled his drink. "I bought the building this morning. I'm reviewing the tenant list tomorrow. I'd hate to find any rude tenants. Evictions are so messy." Silvana's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked at Alice, terror in his eyes. He realized in that second that the power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted. "Come, darling," Julian said to Alice, turning his back on Silvana completely. "The mayor is waving at us." They walked away, leaving Silvana and Tiffany standing in the middle of the room, humiliated and small. As soon as they were out of earshot, Alice let out a shaky breath. "You bought his building?" "I did," Julian smirked. "Pocket change. How did it feel?" Alice looked back at Silvana, who was now frantically whispering to Tiffany, looking terrified. "It felt," Alice smiled, a real smile this time. "It felt like the beginning." But the night wasn't over. As they moved toward the VIP balcony, a man with gray hair and a scar running down his cheek stepped out of the shadows. He blocked their path. Julian stiffened instantly. His relaxed arrogance vanished, replaced by the tension of a predator sensing a threat. "Julian," the man said. His voice was raspy. "Playing house? That's not like you." "Get out of my way, Silas," Julian growled. The man named Silas looked at Alice. His eyes were dead, black pits. "Pretty thing, does she know about the other debt? Or did you forget to mention that your family's fortune is built on graves?" Julian grabbed Alice's arm, pulling her roughly behind him. "We're leaving. Now." "What?" Alice asked, stumbling as he dragged her toward the exit. "Who is that? Don't look back," Julian commanded, his voice tight with something Alice had never heard before. Fear. "Just keep walking." As they hurried out into the night, Alice realized that Silvana was just a minor annoyance. The world she had stepped into with Julian Thorne was far darker and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The ride back to the mansion was suffocating. The heavy partition was up between the back seat and the driver, sealing Alice and Julian in a box of leather and silence. Julian wasn't looking at her. He was staring out the window, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He was typing furiously on his phone, the light from the screen illuminating his intense focus. "Julian," Alice said softly. "Not now," he snapped, not looking up. "Alfred, call the security team. I want the perimeter doubled. Code Red protocols." Alice felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Code Red? "Julian, who was that man? What did he mean about graves?" Julian finally threw his phone onto the seat. He turned to her, his eyes wild. "He meant that you are in danger, Alice." "I made a mistake. I calculated the corporate risks, the PR risks. I didn't calculate him resurfacing tonight." "Who is he?" Silas Vane. Julian spat the name like a curse. "My father's former partner. 30 years ago, they built the foundation of Thorne Enterprises together. My father wanted to go legitimate, tech, real estate. Silas didn't. He wanted to stay in the shadows, arms dealing, smuggling. My father cut him out. Silas swore he'd come back for his half of the empire when the old man died. And now he's back, Alice whispered. He's been in a Thai prison for a decade. He must have gotten out. And he saw you with me. He knows you're my fiancé. Julian ran a hand through his hair, destroying his perfect styling. He will use you to get to me. He thinks you're my weakness now. The car screeched to a halt inside the mansion's gates. Security guards with earpieces were already swarming the grounds. Inside, Julian paced the library, pouring himself a drink with a shaking hand. He downed it in one swallow. "The deal is off," Julian announced, slamming the glass down. Alice stood by the door, still in her gala gown. "What?" "The marriage. The contract. It's null and void. I'll transfer the $5 million to an offshore account for you tonight. I'll have a jet take you to Europe, Switzerland. I have a safe house there. You'll stay there until I handle Silas." "You're sending me away?" Alice felt a strange pang in her chest. It wasn't relief. It was abandonment. Again. "I am saving your life," Julian roared, spinning to face her. "Silas isn't Sylvana Sterling, Alice. He doesn't send mean text messages. He sends body parts in the mail. I dragged you into this because I needed a face for the board. I didn't think I was painting a target on your back." He walked over to her, gripping her shoulders. His eyes were desperate. "Go upstairs. Pack a bag. You leave in an hour." Alice looked at his hands on her shoulders. She looked at the fear in the eyes of a man who feared nothing. She realized then that for the last 2 weeks, he hadn't just been training her to be a prop. He had been listening to her. He had bought her ex-husband's building just to make her smile. He had given her dignity back when she had none. Sylvana had thrown her away when she became inconvenient. Julian was trying to send her away to save her. Alice reached up and covered his hands with hers. "No," she said firmly. Julian blinked. "Excuse me." I said no. "I'm not going to Switzerland. I'm not running away. I did that when I left my parents' house. I did that when Sylvana cheated on me. I'm done running." "Alice, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. If I leave now, the board will see it. The stock will tank. Silas will know he won. He'll smell fear. You told me to never wait for permission to exist. You told me to take up space." She stepped closer, invading his personal space, looking up into his blue eyes. "We made a deal, Julian, for better or worse. I'm staying. If this man wants a fight, we give him a fight." Julian stared at her. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. He looked at her mouth, then back to her eyes. The tension in the room shifted from fear to something scorching hot. "You are incredibly stubborn," he murmured, his voice rough. "I learned from the best." Julian let out a ragged breath. He lowered his forehead to rest against hers. "If you stay, I can't guarantee I can keep you safe, but I swear on my father's name I will burn the city down before I let him touch you." "I know," Alice whispered. He pulled back slightly, his gaze dropping to her lips again. For a moment she thought he was going to kiss her. The air crackled between them. But then he pulled away, his mask of control sliding back into place. "Go to sleep, Alice. Tomorrow we get married. For real. If Silas wants a war, he'll find out that the Wolf of Wall Street has teeth." 1 month later. The wedding had been small, private, and heavily guarded, but the photos were everywhere. Alice Vance was now Alice Thorne. She was on the cover of Vogue. She was attending board meetings. She was, by all accounts, the Queen of New York. And Sylvana Sterling was ruining his life. Julian had been true to his word. He hadn't fired Sylvana. That would be too easy. Instead, he had slowly tightened the screws. He raised the rent on the firm's office by 300%. He poached their best associates. Sylvana's clients were dropping him one by one, afraid to offend the powerful Julian Thorne. Alice sat in her new office at the Thorne Foundation, reviewing grant applications. She felt powerful. She felt useful. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her private line rang. She frowned. Only 3 people had this number. "Hello? Alice? Please, don't hang up." It was Sylvana. His voice sounded ragged, slurred. "Silvana, if you call me again, I'll have security." "It's not about us," Silvana cried out. "It's about him. Julian, Alice, you're in danger. Real danger." "I know who Julian is, Silvana. Your jealousy is pathetic." "I'm not jealous. Okay, I am. But that's not... Look, I met a man. He gave me things. Proof." "Alice, Julian didn't just inherit his company. He stole it. And there's a police report about his first wife." Alice froze. "Julian was never married." "That's what he scrubbed from the internet," Silvana hissed. 10 years ago. A girl named Sarah. She died, Alice. Boating accident. In the Hamptons. Julian was the only one on the boat. There was no autopsy. His father paid off the coroner." "You're lying," Alice said, her grip on the phone tightening. "I have the report. The original toxicology report. She wasn't drowned, Alice. She was poisoned. Meet me. Central Park. The bench by the duck pond. Please. If I'm wrong, you can laugh at me. But if I'm right, you're sleeping next to a murderer." The line went dead. Alice stared at the phone. Her heart was pounding. Sarah. Julian never spoke about his past relationships. He said he had been too busy. "Silas sends body parts. My father's fortune is built on graves." Doubts, like black ink, began to spread in her mind. Was Julian protecting her from Silas, or was he using Silas as a distraction to keep her close? She shouldn't go. It was a trap. But she had to know. She told her bodyguard she was going to the ladies' room and slipped out the service entrance. She hailed a yellow cab, pulling a scarf over her head. The park was gray and windy. Silvana was sitting on the bench, huddled in a trench coat that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. He looked older, broken. When he saw her, he jumped up. He looked terrified. "You came." He shoved a manila envelope into her hands. "Take it. Read it." Alice opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of old police files. A photo of a young, beautiful woman laughing on a boat, and a coroner's report. Cause of death, asphyxiation due to chemical agent. High levels of arsenic found in blood. At the bottom, a signature releasing the body for cremation. Julian Thorne. "He killed her," Silvana whispered, looking around nervously. She was going to leave him. "That man Silas. He contacted me. He said he tried to save Sarah, but he was too late. He said Julian is a psychopath who collects broken women and then disposes of them when he's bored." Alice felt bile rise in her throat. "Why would Silas tell you this?" "Because he wants to save you." Silvana grabbed her arm. "Alice, come with me. We can go to the police. We can—" "Let go of her." The voice was cold, calm, and terrifyingly familiar. Alice spun around. Julian was standing 10 feet away on the path. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was wearing a long black coat, his hands in his pockets. Flanking him were 2 of his security guards. Silvana shrieked and hid behind Alice. "See! He followed you! He's going to kill us both!" Julian didn't look at Silvana. He looked only at Alice. His eyes were devoid of the warmth she had seen the night of the gala. They were ice. "Give me the envelope, Alice," Julian said softly. "Is it true?" Alice asked, her voice shaking, holding the papers up. "Did you have a wife named Sarah? Did she die on your boat?" Julian's jaw tightened. "It is complicated." "Did you sign the order to cremate her before an autopsy could be done?" she screamed. "Give me the envelope." Julian took a step forward. "No!" Silvana shouted. "Run, Alice!" Silvana grabbed Alice's hand and pulled her. In the chaos, she stumbled. Suddenly, a black SUV screeched onto the walking path, curbing up onto the grass. The side door slid open. 3 men in masks jumped out. They weren't Julian's men. "Get 'em both!" one of the masked men yelled. "Julian!" Alice screamed as a masked man grabbed her waist. Julian lunged forward, tackling the man holding Alice. He threw a punch that cracked bone, sending the attacker flying. "Get back!" Julian roared at her, shielding her with his body. But he had forgotten about Silvana. 2 other men grabbed Silvana, dragging him toward the van. "Help! Alice!" Silvana screamed. "We have the spare!" one kidnapper yelled. "Abort!" The man Julian had punched scrambled up and pulled a gun. He fired 2 shots wildly. Bang! Bang! Alice flinched, covering her ears. When she opened her eyes, the van was speeding away, tires smoking. Silvana was gone, and Julian was standing there, swaying slightly. He turned to look at her. "Are you hurt?" he rasped. "No, Alice looked down. Blood was blooming rapidly on the side of Julian's black coat, a dark, wet stain spreading over his ribs. He tried to take a step toward her, then collapsed to his knees. "Julian!" Alice dropped the envelope. The papers, the proof of his alleged crimes, scattered in the wind, blowing away into the pond. She fell to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound. "Oh, God! Oh, God! Someone help!" Julian grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak. His face was gray. "Sarah," he wheezed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Sarah was my sister." Alice's heart stopped. "What?" Silas killed her, to punish my father. I hid the truth, to protect her memory." His eyes started to roll back. "I didn't kill her, Alice. I loved her." He slumped forward into her arms, unconscious. Alice screamed for help as the sirens wailed in the distance, realizing with horror that she had almost believed the lies. She had doubted the only man who had ever put his body between her and a bullet. Silvana was gone. Julian was dying. And Silas Vane had just started the war. The waiting room of New York Presbyterian Hospital was silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of Alice's heel against the linoleum. She was still wearing her gala dress, now stiff with dried blood. Julian's blood. The doors swung open. It wasn't the doctor. It was the board of directors for Thorne Enterprises. 5 men in gray suits, looking like vultures circling a carcass. "Mrs. Thorne," the lead director, a man named Mr. Galsworthy, said stiffly, "this is a tragedy, but we must be practical. With Julian incapacitated, the stock is in free fall. We are invoking the emergency succession clause. We need you to sign over power of attorney to the board until—" Alice stood up. She didn't wipe the blood from her hands. She walked up to Galsworthy, invading his space just as Julian had taught her. "Julian is in surgery," she said, her voice ice cold. "He is not dead. And until he is, I am his wife, I am his proxy, and I am the one who holds the keys to the kingdom." "You are a former housewife with no experience," Galsworthy sputtered. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Silas Vane is demanding a ransom for your ex-husband. He wants the A-Frill Omega file. If we don't give it to him, he says he will release information that will destroy the company. The Omega file contains the names of every corrupt official Julian's father ever bribed." Alice realized aloud, if Silas gets that, he owns half the city. "Exactly. We have to negotiate," Galsworthy urged. "No," Alice said. "We don't negotiate with terrorists. And we certainly don't hand over the weapon they'll use to shoot us." She turned to the corner of the room where Alfred, the butler, stood like a statue. But Alfred wasn't just a butler. She knew that now. He was former Say-S. He was Julian's shadow. "Alfred," Alice commanded. "Where is Silas holding Silvana?" Alfred tapped his earpiece. "We tracked the van to an abandoned shipyard in Red Hook. Madam, it's a trap. Silas wants you to come personally. He thinks you are the weak link." Alice walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. She saw her reflection. She didn't look like the woman who cried in the rain 2 months ago. She looked terrifying. "He wants the weak link?" Alice whispered. "Then let's give him a show." The shipyard smelled of rust and salt water. The wind howled through the skeletal frames of shipping containers. Alice walked down the center of the pier alone. She held the silver briefcase in her hand. At the end of the pier, illuminated by the headlights of the black van, stood Silas Vane. He held a gun pressed against the temple of a kneeling figure. Sylvana Sterling was sobbing. His expensive suit was torn, his face bruised. When he saw Alice, he wailed, "Alice! Give it to him! Please! He's going to kill me!" Sylvana screamed, snot running down his face. "Don't look at me like that! Just give him the file!" Silas laughed. A dry, rasping sound. "Look at him, Mrs. Thorne. This is the man you grieved for? He's been crying for an hour. He offered to sign over his law firm to me if I let him go. He even offered to help me kidnap you." Alice stopped 10 feet away. She looked at Sylvana with zero emotion. No pity, no anger. Just indifference. He was a stranger to her now. "I don't care about him," Alice said calmly. "You can keep him." Silas's smile faltered. Sylvana stopped crying and gaped at her. "What?" "I'm here for my husband's legacy," Alice said, lifting the briefcase. "You want the Omega file? It's in here, but I want a guarantee. You disappear. You leave Julian alone. Forever." "Bring it here," Silas commanded. Alice walked forward. She placed the briefcase on an oil drum between them. "Open it." Alice clicked the latches. She opened the lid. The briefcase was empty. Silas's face twisted in rage. He raised the gun, pointing it directly at Alice's heart. "You stupid bitch. You think this is a game? I'll kill you right here." "You could," Alice said, her pulse thumping in her ears but her voice steady. "But then you'll never get the password to the offshore accounts where Julian moved the money this morning. Or the encrypted file that I just emailed to the FBI, set to send in exactly 2 minutes if I don't enter a cancellation code." Silas froze. "You're bluffing. You're a waitress. A nobody." Alice smiled. It was Julian's smile, dangerous and sharp. "I was a waitress," she corrected. "Now, I'm a thorn. And you forgot the first rule of business, Silas. Never underestimate the person who balances the books." Silas hesitated, his eyes darting around. "Cancel the email," he growled, lowering the gun slightly. "Drop the weapon," Alice countered. "I said cancel it." Silas lunged at her. Alice didn't flinch. She simply dropped to the ground. Crack! A single shot rang out from the darkness of the shipping containers high above. Silas Vane jerked backward, his shoulder exploding in red. He dropped his gun, screaming in pain, and fell to his knees. Alfred and a team of tactical security operatives swarmed from the shadows, weapons drawn. They had Silas zip-tied and face down in the dirt within seconds. Alice stood up, brushing the dust off her dress. She looked down at Silas. "The email was a bluff," she said softly. "But the sniper wasn't." She turned to Sylvana. He was still kneeling, shaking, looking up at her as if she were a god. "Alice," Sylvana stammered. You saved me. I knew you still loved me. I knew it. Oh, thank God. Let's go. Let's get out of here. I'll leave Tiffany. I promise. We can start over." He scrambled to his feet, reaching for her hand. Alice stepped back, avoiding his touch as if he were contagious. "Start over?" Alice laughed. "Sylvana, you tried to sell me out to a murderer 5 minutes ago. I was scared. I didn't mean it." "You always mean it when it benefits you," Alice said. She signaled to one of the guards. "Cut him loose. Give him cab fare." "Cab fare?" Sylvana blinked. "But aren't you taking me home? We can go back to the penthouse." "I'm going to the hospital to sit with my husband," Alice said, turning her back on him. "You're going back to your Honda, if you haven't lost it yet." "Alice!" Sylvana screamed after her as she walked toward the waiting armored car. "You can't leave me here! I'm Sylvana Sterling!" Alice paused at the car door. She looked back one last time. "No," she said. "You're just the man who opened the door for me to leave, and for that, I thank you." She slammed the car door, leaving him standing alone in the dark, cold shipyard. 3 months later, The morning sun streamed into the master bedroom of the Thorne mansion. Alice sat in the armchair, reading the Wall Street Journal. The headline read, "Thorne Enterprises stock soars as Vane syndicate dismantled." The bedsheets rustled. Julian sat up, wincing slightly as he stretched his healing ribs. The scar was still pink, but he was alive. He was strong. He was strong. He watched his wife for a moment. She looked regal. The timid woman who had stumbled into his foyer with a wet suitcase was gone. "You're frowning," Julian said, his voice husky with sleep. Alice looked up, her eyes softening. "I'm reading about Silvana. He filed for bankruptcy yesterday. Sterling and Vance is closing. Apparently, no one wants to hire a lawyer who was found crying in a shipyard." Julian chuckled. "A tragedy." "He called the house line yesterday," Alice added. "He wanted to know if we needed a gardener." "Did you hire him?" "I told him we only hire professionals." Julian smiled and held out his hand. Alice put down the paper and walked over, sitting on the edge of the bed. He took her hand, kissing her knuckles. "You saved the company, Alice," Julian said seriously. "The board is terrified of you. They call you the Iron Lady behind my back." "Good," Alice said. "Fear keeps them honest." "And you saved me," Julian added, his blue eyes searching hers. "Why? You could have taken the money and run. You could be in Switzerland." Alice touched the side of his face. She thought about the rain, the rejection, and the moment this man had opened his door and shielded her from the storm. "Because, Julian," she whispered, "when everyone else looked at me and saw nothing, you looked at me and saw a partner. You didn't just give me a new life. You reminded me that I was strong enough to build one myself." Julian pulled her down for a kiss, deep and full of promises kept. "I love you, Mrs. Thorne," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too, Mr. Thorne," she replied. "Now get up. We have a meeting in an hour. And I have an idea about acquiring a certain law firm in Queens for pennies on the dollar." Julian laughed, a sound of pure joy. The Wolf of Wall Street had found his mate. And Alice Vance had found her home. And that is the story of how Alice turned her biggest tragedy into her greatest victory. She thought her life ended when she signed those divorce papers, but really, it was just beginning. It goes to show that sometimes, when one door closes, a much bigger golden door opens. You just have to be brave enough to knock. What did you think of Alice's revenge? Did Silvana get what he deserved, or was leaving him in the shipyard too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story and want more dramatic tales of romance, betrayal, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next part of our series. Until next time, keep your head high, and remember, your value isn't defined by who leaves you, but by who stays.